There are many different ways to make arms, hands, and rods for a hand and rod puppet, and you might get confused about all the different options. I feel your pain because I've been there too.
Hey folks, I'm Lucy with Ballyhoo Creations, where I create dolls, puppets, and plushies you can stitch with your embroidery machine or a sewing machine. I've tried a lot of different arm options and I've decided which ones I like best, and I'll show you different ones. I'm going to show you 5 different arm rods, 5 ways to fill a puppet arm, and 5 options for puppet hands. We'll go from simple DIY to professional versions, and we'll talk about the pros and cons for each method, as well as where you can find detailed tutorials for some of the more advanced methods. But really the purpose of making this video is for people that are using my patterns or using my puppet kits, that you'll know what kind of options you have for that particular pattern. But like I said, if you're using someone else's pattern, some of these methods are going to work great for those as well. Let's start off talking about arm rods, because this is what's going to move your puppet's hand and arm around, which really brings the puppet to life. The easiest one to do is the external arm rod that you just purchased. You can buy on Amazon or somewhere, and it's just a metal rod that's bent at the end. So you just slip that over the outside of your puppet arm like that, and then you move the puppet arm around. I've got an unfinished puppet here, so I don't want to freak you out with this, he's missing a pupil, but it's got an open arm that I can demonstrate with. So this is the easiest thing, and you can buy these for less than $10 a pair on Amazon, and if you buy a few pairs at a time, they're even cheaper, but it is very visible, and that's the con with this, is just how visible it is. Another option, and this is one that is very easy and cheap, however, I devised it myself, so you've probably never seen it before. This is a plastic rod, and it's got a little piece of plastic, and it's detachable, so you can put the arm rod in there, or pull it out if you want to wash the puppet, because my puppet patterns and kits are intended to be washable puppets. And the way that I make these, I'm going to show you my secret here. I go to Dollar Tree and I buy these balloon sticks. Seriously, $1.25, I get 12 of them. I can't believe I'm giving you this secret here, but it's so cheap and easy. So you get 12 of the clear plastic rods, and then you also get these little balloon holders in there. And what I do with these is I just cut the wings off. You need a good sturdy pair of utility scissors, and just cut those off as close to the little circular bit as you can. And you want to get all of the plastic bits off of the tube, basically, is what I'm doing. And once you get the big parts off, then you can go back and trim it up. Okay, and now I've just got, I don't want to cut my finger here on video, that would be horrible. So now I've just got the little tube that's left there. There's an open end and a closed end, and that open end is what that little rod can fit into. And so what you can do with this little tube is you can insert it inside your puppet's arm, right close to the hand, like that. Or you can also, like the way that I do it, I take a piece of recycled plastic and I cut a little piece that's going to fit inside the hand. I like to poke holes in mine. You don't have to, but because I include these in my puppet kits, you can sew this on with those holes, or if you're using glue, the glue can kind of seep in the holes and that will make it hold better. And then I just glue the little plastic tubing piece onto the piece of plastic, recycled plastic. And then that makes it a detachable hand piece. So this plastic piece would get put inside the hand. This is a small hand, but you would put it as close to the opening here as you can, and then go ahead and sew up the rest of the hand. And your tube would fit in there. It's just a friction fit. There's nothing really holding it in place, but when you kind of twist it, it really holds it in there, but it's easy to twist and pull out as well. If it ever gets too loose, all you have to do is just cut a little tiny piece off at the top, and that'll squeeze the tubing enough to fatten it up on one side, and it'll have a nice friction fit again. So it works really well. I've been using this for a while. I like this method a lot because I'm really designing puppets that are going to be used by kids. It's usually moms and grandmas, maybe teachers, librarians, people at churches that are using, making puppets with my patterns. And so something that is safe for kids is really important to me. Also, being washable is very important to me. So that kind of dictates what materials I prefer to use. I'm not a professional puppeteer. I don't think that these rods would hold up well for a professional because they're flimsy. and so you can't get as, you know, there's some flimsiness to them. So I'm not saying that a professional puppeteer would love to use this, but I am saying if you're making puppets for home use, this is probably going to be a great option for you because it's cheap, it's easy, you don't need any special tools, and it's safe for kids because, I mean, if the kid detaches the rod, yeah, you can still give a good whipping with this, but not as much as if you had a metal rod. So I'm a little worried about metal rods in children. That's why I really like this method the best for children. Like I said, cheap, easy, you don't need any special tools. Okay, for the next 3 methods, I'm going to be talking about using different types of rods, and I'm going to use a metal rod for my examples here, but you could use a plastic rod, you could use a wooden dowel, you could use a straightened out coat hanger, you could use a lucite rod that's clear if you can find those, but I'm going to use metal rods because that's what I have available to demonstrate with, and we'll talk about the different tops on these 3 types, but you could use this on any different rod material. The first one here, this is a metal rod, and by the way, I'm using insulation supports. If you want to make your own metal rods, I won't get too far into that in this video. I could make a separate video because I did make this. This is a professional hand rod, and this is a wooden dowel. And the insulation support plus shrink tubing, you need special tools to do this. It's not the easiest thing to make. It takes a lot of time. That's why I've moved over to the plastic ones instead. But if you're wondering where I'm getting my metal, this is an insulation support, and some people prefer to use welding rods instead. So there's just a tip for you. Some people will use the metal rod with a rubber band, and the way that you do that, I will show you how to tie this if you have access to, for example, a dowel rod or a coat hanger. This is very easy. It just looks complicated. So you want to make a loop, and you're just doing pass one end into the other, and that's just a regular slip knot there. And pull that. Okay, so now you've got this loop hanging off. You're going to take your thumb and your forefinger like this, make a triangle, and then wrap it. So twist your hand so that it wraps around the thumb and the finger, and then bring them together, pinch, and then you want to move that rubber band off of one or the other. So you've now got this loop, okay? And then put the tip of the rod in there like that. And then pull that middle part. Now you've got another slip knot up towards the top. See how that works? And that is your hand loop that you would then put your puppet's hand in. And you could tighten it up, use a different size of rubber band. You could use these natural colored rubber bands will probably match the skin tone if you've got a human puppet, or there are also clear rubber bands available, so use what you have. I don't like this method as much because for me the rubber band will come off easily, but some people say that's not a problem for them. Also, I don't get the hand control. I can't really flap the hand around as much as I want to. So just play around with that if you like this method. Again, this is fairly cheap and easy. You could use the rubber band on one of the balloon rods too. That's a really cheap way to go. Another option that I have done, you can even just take a piece of tape. This is clear tape with a rubber band, and pass the tape through the rubber band and attach it to whatever rod that you have, whether it's a dowel rod, plastic rod, whatever. You can do something like that and just put the puppet's hand in that. So if you're looking for something like you just finished your puppet and you want to try it out, and you don't have arm rods yet, try something super simple like this. It'll get you going. So that was the rubber band method. And then this is the handmade, this is meant to be an internal rod, and this one would go inside the puppet's hand. Make sure that you get stuffing on both sides of it so that you don't see the wire showing through. But usually you'll find a P shape or maybe a triangular shape if you buy rods. You can go on Etsy and you can find puppet arm rods. Just search for puppet arm rods and you'll find people making these, or you can make them yourselves, and I'll point you in the description box to some different tutorials. I know Adam Krudinger has one and a couple of other makers have these. My technique is a little different than theirs. Especially with the shrink tubing, which I find at Granger, but the insulation support rods you can find at like Home Depot or Lowe's, and then of course dowel rods also there. So, and then I used epoxy to attach it. I'm not going to get into all the ins and outs of how I make this, but this is a professional option if you wanted it. And again, that would go internal to the puppet. You could also use something like this with the handle and then do the rubber band on the end of it instead of having the straight edge like this. So either of those work. I used to sell these with my puppet kits, but I've switched over to the plastic instead. And then the final one is, we'll talk about this a little bit more with the wiring of the hands that we're going to get to, but this is the rod that's actually attached to some armature wire that's twisted into the hand shape, and then you would go ahead and put that in your puppet hand, and the rod is internal. It's going to be up inside. So you would attach, whether you're using epoxy glue, I've got electrical tape around it here. I like to use electrical tape because it is made to stick to wire, and it's not sticky it won't stick to your fabric when you're putting it up inside. So electrical tape is my choice there. Also, it doesn't come off when you wash it. It still kind of stays sticky. So those are 5 different arm rods. You've got your internal wired to the hand. You've got your internal pro-grade rod like this. You've got any kind of rod you want with a rubber band attached to it. You've got the plastic balloon stick option that I showed you how to make. And then you've got your purchased rod that you can buy off of Amazon or somewhere like that. Filling puppet arms. There are 5 different ways I'm going to show you that you can fill a puppet arm, and the first way would be using fiber fill. This is just regular stuffing that you buy at the craft store, polyester fiber fill. You could use the Polyfill brand. It's not the best out there. Pay a little more money and you get a better stuffing, but the Polyfill is fine for a puppet arm. And what I wanted to point out with this is when you stuff an arm, make sure you leave a break in the stuffing at the elbow and the wrist. What I mean by that is I've got stuffing all the way up to here. I've already put some stuffing in there. And hemostats are going to be your best friend if you're stuffing puppet arms and hands and things like that. You can go to Walmart in the fishing aisle and find this brand of hemostats that I use here, and they have a nice grip here. These are less than $5 typically. You could pay $20 for them at a sewing store or a craft store. You might find something like this. You definitely want to have ones with the larger, thicker jaws, because if you are using the skinny hemostats like this one that has a very fine tip, almost like tweezers, these are going to rip holes in your fabric because you're turning, big things like this. So you want a wider jawed hemostat. These are going to be your best friend. You will thank me not just later, but many times once you start learning how to use these for stuffing and turning. But once you've got your stuffing up in there, and I'm going to put it all the way up, and I want to leave a little break between this ball and then another wad of stuffing that I'm going to put in there. And you'll see why I'm doing this. You'll be able to bend the elbow. Bend at the elbow instead of having a straight arm. And I'm not going to finish this right now, but you see how there's a little break right there? You can fill that in a little bit, just don't make it one big thickness, one big tube of stuffing. And that way when you move the arm, it breaks at the elbow like a regular arm would. And you would do the same at the wrist. So you would have your upper arm, lower arm, and wrist. So that is a tip for when you're filling with stuffing and polyfill. Instead of using a purchased polyfill, is you could use your scraps, like fleece scraps or fur scraps, and use those instead because they're nice and fluffy. So that's a nice sustainable kind of stuffing to use. My third option would be wooden beads, and I'm sorry that I don't have an example of wooden beads for you, but I know that craft stores and even Dollar Tree has a long string of wooden beads, and you can put that inside the arm. It doesn't work so great for a thicker arm like this, but for the skinny arms, that works really nicely because it's weighted, and so you have kind of a spaghetti arm look to it. And if you look at some of the Sesame Street Muppets, they have that spaghetti arm look because they use something like a weighted string of beads inside the arm. So that's an option that you could use. You could also string your own wooden beads. You don't have to buy them on a string. The other option I'm going to show is using foam inside the arms, and this is one of my favorites. These are just foam rollers. You can buy them at discount stores. Again, Dollar Tree has a lot of great stuff for puppet making, and these are Dollar Tree foam curlers, but you could also buy them at places like a Target, Walmart, someplace like that. Beauty supply stores carry these, and it's just a nice foam that doesn't hurt if it gets wet. And for a puppet arm like this one, you can see how I've got 2 pieces in here, and I cut my piece foam curler into 2 pieces. And in this one, I actually used 2 different thicknesses to give the upper arm a little more thickness than the lower. Doesn't really matter, it's just my preference. and you just put them in there. I mean, it's that simple. There's nothing special about that. They're not heavy, but they can run through the washing machine with these curlers in here. And I'll leave that little break again at the elbow so that I get that nice bend when I move the arm around. So that is a curler that I've cut in half. The other option, if you have thicker arms, you can get bigger foam noodles. Cosplay sections of the craft store have larger rods like this. This is all I have left is the half of it. Pool noodles you can cut into pieces. You can even maybe find some specialty foam that's the right thickness for your arm. So just keep your eye out for things like that. Packaging materials and things like that. You can find different foam or cosplay or places like that. So that's another option, is to fill with foam instead of the fiber fill. And the last option would be wire, and the reason I'm showing another noodle here is because there's wire inside, and I've actually found that sometimes I don't even have to use my special craft wire. I can just put one of these up inside the arm, and depending on what pattern you're using, it might be the perfect length or it might be too short. But on this one, it's just about right. It comes right here to the wrist. And so if I were going to put the wired hand, which I'm going to show in a little bit, that I showed on the arm rod, that would fit right in here. And you could even push this out of the way and attach the wire to the wire inside this curler. And then that way your puppet has an arm that can be bent. And the reason that I like to do this, you can't bend it easily if you're working the puppet arm, but I use it a lot for, let me find my puppet. I like to put the wire in the hand that does not have the arm rod because I'm not a good enough puppeteer to use dual hand arm rods. Some people can. Some people like to do the double arm rods, but I'm not dexterous enough for that. So I like to have one arm rod that I work and then one hand that's just free and it doesn't have an arm rod in it. It has a wire. So I can pose it, and when my puppet is sitting on my shelf, his arm is just hanging there, or I can do it where I pin it and he's got some kind of facial expression going on and take pictures and things like that. So that's how I like to do it, but that's just my preference. You do whatever you want to do. You could put an arm rod in both hands, wire in both arms so that you don't have to have an arm rod. So that's your option. And finally, let's talk about puppet hands and how you can fill those in different ways. The first way, again, actually would be no filler at all. This puppet right here doesn't have any filling because he's got fleece fingers, and because fleece is nice and puffy, I didn't put any filler in there, and his fingers still give this nice little round. He's very fuzzy, but he's got little round fingers. And this works with very small fingers, like some of my puppet patterns have the small fingers like this, and you don't have to use filler if you're using a thick fabric like a fleece. Another option would be fiber fill, and again, this is where your hemostats that I just talked about in the arm filling section are going to come in very, very handy, because you want to have a small wad of stuffing and just use the hemostats, and you can easily, I've got stuffing in the way there, but you can just poke that in there and get a nice stuffed finger that way. If you're using a chopstick or a pencil or something, it's very hard to get it in here and get it evenly stuffed. But with hemostats, it makes the job much, much easier. So try that. Again, $5 at Walmart. I mean, there's no excuse not to have a pair of these. And you could use fiber fill in the fingers. So that's another option. The third option that I'll show is using wired armature wire inside of the hand. And to do something like this, you can use your hand as the template and then bend the wire in the rough shape of the hand and then twist each finger so that you get a twisted pair of wires for each finger, which is going to be much stronger than the single wire. You also get that nice rounded edge so it won't poke through your fabric. And then you can just go ahead and put the hand in, put the wire into the hand like you're putting on a glove. And in the arm rod section, we talked about how you can attach this to the arm rod. In the arm filling section, we talked about how you can attach it to like a foam roller or a wire or something. And that way you can have a posable hand. Go ahead and stuff around those fingers. And in the next method, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but the wired fingers might be okay for what you're doing. This wire is not going to come out, and the aluminum armature wire is very important. It is machine washable because it's aluminum, but if you're using a steel wire, it's going to rust and it's going to discolor your hand. So you do need to be using an aluminum armature wire. I'll link in the description box of where you can get them. The only local craft store around America that I know of would be Michael's Crafts. They sell this kind of wire in the polymer clay aisle. Just look for aluminum armature wire. It comes in a package of spool, and then of course Amazon, you can buy it there. So once you've got your wire in the fingers, now your fingers are posable, which is awesome because your puppets can do things, you know, point and pick their nose or whatever you want to do with it, whatever your puppet wants to do, because sometimes they have a mind of their own. I don't understand how that happens. So that's the wire inside the hand. And again, you could stuff around that. You could also cover your wire with foam. This is the fourth method, and professional puppets are most likely going to have a foam covering over a steel wire. And this is how the Muppets do it, so this is how most pro puppet makers use that method. I'm showing a picture on Pinterest here because I don't like working with contact cement. I can't breathe the air around it, so I don't even have that in my studio anymore. I have developed ways that work for puppets for home use that do not use half-inch foam and contact cement. So I don't use this method that I'm showing you, but I am including it because if you are making someone else's pattern or you want to make a professional level puppet and you want to know how to do that, I'm going to send you over to where you can find that out. I don't recommend the foam covered hand for the Ballyhoo puppet patterns because the hand patterns are too small. And the last option for puppet hands is actually not a filled hand at all. But if you have another craft that you use, for example, needle felting, you could needle felt a hand. You could use foam clay, which is a nice lightweight clay after it's finished, but you could use a foam clay hand and put that inside the puppet's arm. You could get child's mittens or gloves and put that on the end. Just cut the hand off of your puppet pattern, or don't sew that part. Leave it open and put a child's mitten over it, and then put fiberfill or something inside the fingers that way. If you don't like sewing hands, try that little mitten method. That might work great for you. If you're going to use one of those alternate methods, just make sure the hand is lightweight so it's still easy to move around. That's all I have to share about puppet arm fillings, hand fillings, and arm rods. We talked about 5 different types of arm rods. You could use metal, plastic, wood. You could have an internal arm rod, an external arm rod, or the plastic arm rod, which I showed you how to make, that's super cheap and easy. We also talked about different ways to fill the arm, whether you're using stuffing, you could use wood beads, you could use foam pieces, you could use wire, or you could use your fabric scraps too. So 5 different ways to fill an arm were talked about. And then we also talked about 5 different puppet hand ways of filling them, whether you're using fiber fill, no filling at all. You could put wire in there to make them posable. Lots of different ways to deal with puppet hands, arms, arm rods, all of that kind of stuff. If you like the puppet patterns that you see behind me, check out Ballyhoo Creations. I've got puppets that look like humans, puppets that look like furry monsters you just saw, different types of puppets. With only a few patterns, you can really change the look, and now you know ways to use the hands and arms and arm rods, and just run to Dollar Tree or Walmart or someplace like that, and you can get going with arm rods pretty simply on your own. I hope that helps you out. I hope you learned a few tips and tricks and things with arms and hands for puppets. That's all I got for now. Check out my other videos on doll and puppet making, and I'll see you later, folks.